and welcome to the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. Can you please be upstanding as the speaker and the chair take their seats? And as they come, kindly put your phones on silent. Thank you.
Please sit. The President of the Academy, past Presidents of the Academy, Vice Presidents of the Academy, Fellows of the Academy, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, students, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Fellows of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, we welcome you all cordially to this evening's inaugural lecture, which is on the topic, Reclaiming Voices in the Global Order, Language, Gender, and the African Academy. So my name is APPIAH Honorary Secretary of the Academy. And by way of brief introduction or background information, since 1973, newly elected Fellows of the Academy have had to deliver an inaugural lecture as part of their initial core responsibilities as Fellows. So if you look in the brochure, you will find listed titles of previous inaugural lectures that have been delivered since 1993 by way of information. I'd also like to mention that this program is being streamed live via Zoom, Facebook, and also on the Academy's YouTube page. And so we take this opportunity to also welcome those who have managed to join us online. It is now my singular honor to introduce the chairperson for this event. And I will read a brief bio sketch. Our chair is a distinguished scholar in immunology and parasitology. She is the president of the Academy. She was educated initially at Achimota School and then had her bachelor's, master's, and doctoral training in the UK from the Universities of Surrey, Brunel, and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, as well as the University of London. She has dedicated no less than 4 decades to teaching and research at esteemed universities worldwide, including the National Institutes of Health, NIH, and Georgetown University in the USA, Queensland University, Brisbane, Australia, and Chiang Mai University in Thailand, as well as the University of Ghana. Her breaking research on malaria immunity and vaccine development has earned her international recognition. In fact, she's part of the core initial pioneering team whose work led to the first human malaria vaccine, the RTSS, which we have now. Our chair co-initiated and co-led the first NIH International Center of Infectious Diseases Research at the University of Yaoundé 1 in Cameroon. Here at the University of Ghana, she established the immunology unit at the Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research. She was the first female director and foundation dean of the School of Public Health. Her research understandably spans worldwide collaborations. This has earned her many recognitions and awards. I will name just a couple of them. She has been the former UNESCO Chair for Women in Science, the West African region, a fellow of the African Academy of Sciences, the 2014 laureate, the African Union Kwame Nkrumah Award for Women in Science, and the 2019 Clara Safmed Ladlo Award of the American Society for Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. Women's World in 2021 recognized her as one of 7 women in science who have changed our world for the better. Our chair continues research, capacity building, mentorship. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Emerita Professor ISABELLA AKYYINBAH, our chairperson, president of the Academy. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorary Secretary, for your kind words. Past presidents of the Academy, Nana SKB Asante and Professor Sifa Dede, they're piling up. Today, we have all the past presidents here. Her Ladyship, wonderful. And then vice presidents of the Academy, fellows of the Academy, Your Excellencies, distinguished ministers, distinguished invited guests, our students, all fellows and invited guests online, media, ladies and gentlemen, and all protocols observed. Good evening. Now, it is my distinct honor and privilege to welcome you to Ghana Academy's second inaugural lecture of 2026. Now, there are 2 events that lie at the heart of every National Academy: the election and induction of new fellows, and the fellows' inaugural lecture. Now, on induction day, colleagues recognize newly elected fellows by conferring the title FGA, and that we don't leave behind. That ceremony is attended by family, friends, and professional peers who celebrate the fellow's achievement. Now, the inaugural lecture is the most significant academic engagement for a fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. It gives the inducted fellow a platform to explain what they stand for, to recount their academic journey, and to present their contributions to knowledge. It is an opportunity to show how scholarship has been applied for the benefit of community and society, and to demonstrate the substance of a scholarly life. Today, we are privileged to hear from a distinguished scholar and leader, Vice-Chancellor Professor Nana APPIAH AMFO, FGA. Her lecture has drawn one of the largest audiences the Academy has ever seen. And we are we are joined by fellows, family, friends, colleagues, associates, and students, all eager to hear her address on a timely and important topic: reclaiming voice, global order, language, gender, and the African Academy. This topic is rich in nuance and of great consequence to our academic and public life. We look forward with anticipation to Professor Amfo's insights. But before I invite her to the podium, allow me to present only a brief profile of her academic and administrative achievements. Professor Nana APPIAH AMFO is a professor of linguistics and the first female vice-chancellor of the University of Ghana. An accomplished scholar of international repute, her research spans pragmatics, discourse analysis, sociolinguistics, and multilingualism, with a particular focus on language use in domains such as health, gender, politics, religion, and migration. She has published extensively in leading peer-reviewed journals and edited volumes, and her work is widely cited in global conversations on African linguistics and knowledge production. Her scholarship includes influential contributions to volumes such as From Southern Theory to Decolonizing Sociolinguistics and Southernizing Sociolinguistics. And these are all different, as well as numerous journal articles on language, identity, and communication in African contexts. Professor Amfo has led and contributed to several major research projects, including interdisciplinary studies on multilingualism, healthcare communication, gender representation, and language policy. She is currently team lead of the Enhancing Humanities Research in Africa, EHURA project, a 900,000 Carnegie Corporation-funded initiative supporting research capacity, mentorship, and scholarly publishing across the continent. Her earlier work includes projects on language and mental health communication, multilingual practices in migration contexts, and the socio-environmental and communicative dimensions of small-scale mining. A globally recognized academic voice, she has delivered keynote lectures and participated in major international conferences across Africa, Europe, Asia, North America, and Australia. She has served extensively as an external examiner for undergraduate and postgraduate programs across leading universities in Africa and beyond, including institutions in Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, Tanzania, and Norway. She's also widely engaged as an assessor for academic promotions, research grants, and international fellowship schemes, and as a reviewer for numerous high-impact journals, also academic publishers in linguistics and related fields. She is an experienced trainer in higher education leadership and has facilitated capacity-building programs for university leaders and managers across Africa. Her work bridges theory and practice, consistently advancing the visibility and authority of African scholarship within global knowledge systems. Professor Amfo holds a PhD and MPhil in linguistics from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, MTNU, and a Bachelor of Arts in French and Linguistics from the University of Ghana. She is an alumni of Holy Child School and Archbishop Porter Girls Secondary School. She has also undertaken executive leadership training at Harvard Business School, INSEAD, and the University of Applied Sciences in Osnabrück, Germany. Since the appointment as Vice-Chancellor in October 2021, she has led the University of Ghana with a vision anchored in leveraging technology and advancing human welfare. Prior to that, she served as Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Academic and Student Affairs. She is founding Dean of the School of Languages and also was the head of the Department of Linguistics. She is a leading figure in global higher education networks, serving as Chair of Council of the Association of Commonwealth Universities, ACU, Vice Chair of the African Research University Alliance, ARUA, and the Worldwide Universities Network, WUN, and a member of the Administrative Board of the International Association of Universities, IAU. She also serves on the Consultative Board of the International Pragmatics Association, a champion of African scholarship and intellectual communication communities. Professor Amfo is founding president of the African Humanities Association, president of the International Federation of Modern Languages and Literatures, and co-founder of the African Pragmatics Association. She has mentored numerous early career scholars across the continent and continues to shape research leadership and capacity development initiative in Africa. Her contributions have been recognized through several prestigious awards, including the Guba Nana Yaa Asantewaa Woman of Enlightenment Award 2021, the GLACE Africa Woman of the Year for Excellence of Education 2023, and the Association of Africa Universities Ambassador for Gender Equity and Social Inclusion 2025. She is a fellow of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, DAD, the Commonwealth Professionals Fellowship, and the International Women's Forum Leadership Program. Professor Amfo is married to Mr. Frank Amfo, and they're parents, proud parents of 3 adult children. Now, outside her professional commitments, yes, she has something outside the commercial. She enjoys walking, playing tennis, dancing, and listening to good music. But above all, Professor Amfo was elected and inducted as a fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2021. So, the topic is really rich in nuance and consequences. And after this profile, I say that, Professor, your audience, your professor. Thank you.
In halls where African ideas meet the page, a language seeks to break the silent seal. It claims the stage in this modern age to speak the truths only hearts can feel. The gendered echo rises through the floor, a woman's song, a man's resilient cry. Together they unlock the heavy door to claim their space beneath the open sky. The global order shifts its rigid frame as diverse voices rise to lead the way.
I am a lady scholar. I speak Chi. I'm a female. I am a male academic. I am a bird. I am a male bonja.
Always bound to complement each other, to bring the light of a courageous day. From deep within the African Academy, scholars weave a future bold and bright. Male and female luminously shine glare that turns dark, clouded minds into light. Beneath the kente loom of shared debate, the Queen Mother and the Chief find equal ground. From Legon's heights to schools of change, their pens have become swords of quiet change. So, across the borders, Edinkra symbols whisper, change the narrative map, decolonize the mind, close the ancient gap, shatter the glass ceiling, genders abreast, hand in hand, movement in equal measure. Slowly and gradually, with language and pen strokes. Today, we reclaim our voice in the global order. Language Gender, and the African Academy.
Pia Legon okunini ni ba bekasa. Empanyin se obrempon kasa na bebia ayedin enenti enne oba panyin nana amfo apia. Apia kontonchi kurochi hine. Ono enna enne wama aha aye menya se so menya. Na ninti enne aha beye dete se dodowa. Enne wawoma University of Ghana Dance Department aba abepia wasema oba beka no so na senia ye kanen enne minister tie di na daworoma osimima udin foforo ye maame enne osimimfro okukudurufu obenfo amfo apia esa ne se we kukuru oman kronkron Ghana esi wukonso ama enne ema nyina ho abanika ne ye kane se twedi ampombase ye adom Allah ene nananom enkoso enhyiraw womo ho ban na wasema obabeka ne panyin wasem bi o se aboa kuro twamansa so obedo srade a osua preko enne ye nyina yensua ye maame okukudurufu amfo apia anye wodenti wa ma wunsem ama no yadawas onyame nhyiraw kasa na wo matie.
Thank you very much. That was Department of Dance Studies, University of Ghana. And thank you, Madam President, for your generous introduction. I thought you said you were going to do an abridged version. Madam Chair and President of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, Vice Presidents of the Academy, past presidents and vice presidents of the Academy, distinguished fellows of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, honorable members of Parliament and ministers of state, and let me single out my sector minister who is here with us. Thank you very much for your presence. Members of the Diplomatic Corps, chief executives, colleague VCs, invited guests, esteemed colleagues, dear students, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, those here and others joining us online, good evening. Now, I'm deeply grateful for the privilege of delivering this inaugural lecture, a privilege that I have been gently reminded over time is long overdue. But this delay has probably been useful. It has afforded me the opportunity to reflect more deliberately on what has defined my scholarly and professional journey, a journey that has extended beyond the production of knowledge to include the building of scholarly communities, the mentoring of younger academics, and engagement through professional networks to ensure that our scholarship makes a tangible difference. An inaugural lecture, as our Madam Chair said, in many ways is a recounting or an accounting, an opportunity to trace the questions that have sustained one's intellectual life, the collaborations that have shaped it, and the broader social commitments that give it meaning. My own academic journey has been anchored in linguistics, particularly in pragmatics and sociolinguistics, and has been shaped by a sustained engagement with language, identity, and the politics of knowledge production. Across this journey, I have been concerned not only with how language is structured, but with how it functions as social action, how meaning is negotiated, how identities are performed, and how power is reproduced and sometimes resisted through everyday communication. In engaging these questions, I've also grappled with the implications of dominant narratives about knowledge creation and dissemination, particularly as they relate to Africa. My work, often in collaboration with others, has sought to interrogate these narratives and to contribute to creating spaces in which African voices and experiences are recognized, valued, and centered. These concerns have over time converged around three interconnecting themes: language as social action, voice as a site of power, and the politics of knowledge production about Africa. It is at the intersection of these themes that this lecture is situated. Over the past 2 decades, my work has explored language across multiple domains: in gender relations, in political communication, in religious discourse, in health communication, and in multilingual context. Across these domains, one insight has remained constant. Language is not merely a tool for communication. It's a mechanism through which power is exercised, negotiated, and sometimes resisted. This lecture brings these strands of work together. It draws on my engagements in pragmatics and meaning-making, multilingualism in Ghanaian context, gendered discourse, sociolinguistic publishing, and the visibility of African, particularly African women scholars, and work in continental scholarly networks, especially through the African Humanities Association. Together, these strands form the basis of the argument I advance today, that the question of voice, who speaks, who is heard, and who is recognized as a producer of knowledge, lies at the heart of Africa's place in the global order. My lecture this evening will proceed as follows. My next section will address the point about why reclaim voice. I will then turn to the issue of voice, power, and meaning from a linguistic perspective, which will be followed by a section on voice, knowledge, and the politics of recognition. A discussion of the significance of multilingualism and sociolinguistic theories and how these could challenge Eurocentric theories will be next. This will dovetail into the section on gender issues with a focus on gender, language, and regulation. The role of institutions, networks, and the reclaiming of voice will be the penultimate section. And the final section, before I conclude, will address the matter of funding, power, and the political economy of voice. So why reclaim voice? Madam Chair, we are living in a moment of significant global transition. The contemporary global order is shaped by geopolitical realignments, ongoing conflicts and the threat of new ones, rapid technological change, expanding knowledge economies, and increasingly digital and algorithmic systems that determine visibility and influence. In this context, voice has become a form of power. Voice is not simply the ability to speak, it is the authority to define problems, to set agendas, to determine what counts as knowledge, and to shape the narratives that organize global attention. But such authority does not emerge in a vacuum. It is historically produced and institutionally sustained. To understand the contemporary dynamics of knowledge production, we must therefore situate them within their historical context. The global knowledge order has long been shaped by the dominance of the global north, a dominance rooted in colonial histories that extended beyond territorial control to include the imposition of languages, educational systems, and epistemologies. This produced a framework in which knowledge generated in Africa was systematically devalued. In colonial and even post-colonial educational systems, for instance, African languages were often labeled vernacular, a term that itself signals inferiority. So you shouldn't be referring to your language as a vernacular. Their use in formal settings, including schools, was not only discouraged, but actively punished, sometimes through enforced declarations designed to discipline both language and identity. I'm sure many of us here today can identify with those lines on the screens. More broadly, knowledge creation came to be viewed through an Eurocentric lens in which African ways of knowing were either marginalized or rendered invisible. This dynamic is evident even within my own discipline. Johann Gottlieb Christaller, the 19th century German missionary and ethno-linguist, made significant contributions to the study of the Akan language, producing a grammar, a dictionary, and a Bible translation that remain foundational. Yet, for decades after his work, it was virtually impossible to engage in scholarly work on Akan without aligning with his analysis. This was not simply a matter of scholarly respect. It reflected a deeper structure of authority, one in which knowledge produced by an external observer was accorded enduring legitimacy, while subsequent work by indigenous scholars, even when offering new insights grounded in lived linguistic experience, struggled for recognition. In other words, authority was not only about knowledge, it was about who produced that knowledge. And this pattern persists. In the contemporary academic publishing landscape, many leading journals and presses remain concentrated in the global north. Research that aligns with established Western paradigms are more readily accepted, while work grounded in African realities often faces additional barriers to recognition. Madam Chair, this dynamic is not only structural, it is also deeply embedded in the everyday practices of academic knowledge production. In a recent article published in African Studies entitled "I Shall Live and Not Perish, Revisit and Revise and Resubmit," Emerita Professor Akosua Amfo, who is here today with us, reflects on the politics of publishing, suggesting that what counts as legitimate knowledge is often determined not only by what is said, but by who says it, where it is published, and whose work is cited. I'm only paraphrasing her here. She recounts, for instance, how forms of knowledge that were taken for granted within African context, what we might call lived communal and experiential knowledge, are frequently required to be validated through written sources, often from the global north, before they are accepted as credible. What is known locally must be reauthorized externally. More broadly, this reflects what has been described as the politics of citation, the ways in which scholarly authority is constructed through patterns of referencing that center some voices while marginalizing others. In such a system, citation is not merely acknowledgement. It is a gatekeeping mechanism that determines whose ideas travel, what becomes thinkable, and whose knowledge is elevated to theory or reduced to data. Voice, therefore, is not only about speaking, but about being citable and being recognized as a producer of knowledge. Against this historical and structural backdrop, reclaiming voice is not a sentimental aspiration, but a strategic, ethical, and urgent imperative through which recent global developments must be understood. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, if voice is the authority to define problems and shape narratives, then we witnessed just last month a powerful illustration of what reclaiming voice can look like in the global arena. At the recent high-level United Nations side event on reparatory justice for the trafficking of enslaved Africans and the racialized chattel enslavement of Africans, a significant shift occurred, not only politically, but discursively. The recent United Nations resolution recognizing the enslavement of Africans as the gravest crime against humanity is not merely a diplomatic milestone. It is fundamentally a discursive intervention, a reassertion of historical truth through the language of global justice. His Excellency President John Dramani Mahama captured this power of language with striking clarity when he opened his address with these words, and I quote, "Truth begins with language, with the power that words hold to shape consciousness and to shape perspectives to propel an action or other, unquote. For centuries, the transatlantic slave trade has been described in ways that obscure its scale and brutality. Terminologies have softened violence, distanced responsibility, and normalized injustice. As President Mahama noted, even the use of the word workers in place of slaves in some educational materials in the state of Texas reflect how language can be used to distort historical reality. At the same forum, Professor Edem Adote of the University of Ghana's Institute of African Studies further sharpened this point by drawing attention to the importance of terminology. He distinguished between slave trade and slavery as related but not identical phenomena, noting that while the trade was abolished earlier, the institution itself persisted much longer. More importantly, he reframed the language. It was not trade, it was trafficking of enslaved people. They were not goods, they were human beings. To name it clearly, to frame it unequivocally as a crime against humanity is to move from description to moral judgment. And significantly, Ghana played a leading role in this effort through political leadership, but also through scholarship. The contributions of Ghanaian scholars, including colleagues from the University of Ghana, such as Professor Edem Adote and Professor Samuel Intewusu, have helped to foreground Africa's historical experience within global discourse. What we see here is a convergence of scholarship, policy, and political leadership in the act of reclaiming voice. As a linguist, I'm particularly struck by the centrality of naming in this moment, because to name is to define, and to define is to exercise power. This is precisely what is at stake in the global knowledge order. Africa cannot afford to remain primarily a subject of other people's theories. We cannot remain a site of data extraction while the intellectual rewards, publication, prestige, and agenda setting accumulate elsewhere. And importantly, even within this history, we are reminded that voice is also gendered. The system of enslavement itself encoded gendered inequalities. For example, the principle that the children of enslaved women inherited their status regardless of their father's identity. This is a powerful reminder that domination operates through multiple intersecting axes. We'll return to the question of gender shortly, but let me state clearly here, we cannot reclaim voice without confronting gender. A continent cannot reclaim intellectual sovereignty while muting half of its thinkers. Madam Chair, as a linguist, I approach the question of voice through the lens of pragmatics. Pragmatics reminds us that meaning does not reside in words alone. Meaning is constructed in context, shaped by relationships, assumptions, intentions, and crucially, power. What matters is not only what is said, but who says it, to whom, and under what conditions, and with what uptake. There is often a gap between what is said and what is meant. One of my favorite illustrations of this gap comes from Charles Maurice de Talleyrand-Périgot, a French statesman and diplomat who famously observed, and I quote, "A diplomat who says yes means maybe. A diplomat who says maybe means no. And a diplomat who says no is no diplomat." You can ask my diplomat friend, Ambassador Laura, to confirm or not afterwards. The point is simple. The point is simple but profound. Language is rarely transparent. We see this clearly in our own context. In Ghana, when a senior political or public figure, like myself or my minister, says, "We are looking into the matter," this may signal I think you already know where this is going. This may signal reassurance or deflection, delay, or even quiet closure. The words appear straightforward, but their meanings is negotiated within a shared understanding of political communication. Indeed, as Talleyrand Perigot also suggested, speech can be used not only to reveal thought, but to obscure it. This is precisely why political communication has become such a contested space. This is what has given thriving jobs to party and government communicators. Statements that appear clear on the surface are often followed by layers of explanation, reinterpretation, and reframing, sometimes to clarify, sometimes to recalibrate meaning, and sometimes to shift public understanding altogether. You know, when sometimes a high-ranking political figure says something, you think you understand, you know you understand, till the communicators start moving from station to station and platform to platform to the point where you start getting confused. A recent example of such reinterpretation comes from a high-ranking member of the Majority Caucus in Parliament, when in reference to the 24-hour economy campaign promise of the now ruling government, he said on the floor of Parliament, there are different variants of 24-hour operations. One can decide to do 122, or one can decide to do 133, but that doesn't mean it is still not 24-hour economy. At times, the distance between what is said and what is communicated can be remarkably wide. Even in everyday discourse, meaning is deeply contextual. A drawn-out yes in a trotro by the trotro maid, for instance, is not affirmation. It is a request for fares. A more recent example across social media is Yakubu Manage. And for those of you who may not know the context, here is the context. I'm told that this involves a Nigerian military recruit who was going through their usual strenuous exercise regime, and he was really at the point of exasperation. And the trainer says, Yakubu, manage. You may feel it like you're going to die, but you will not die. Is that clear? And in his exasperated voice, he still manages to say, yes, sir. So Yakubu Manage has evolved into a shorthand for resilience, for enduring hardship, even as they sometimes normalize difficult or unjust conditions. This is the essence of pragmatics, and it brings us to a critical point. Voice is not merely about speaking, it's about being recognized as a credible knower. Some voices are heard as authoritative by default, while others must struggle for recognition. Patterns shaped not by accident, but by history, institutions, and the global hierarchies of knowledge. Many voices, particularly from the global south, must first overcome the burden of being unheard, which is why reclaiming voice demands not mere participation, but a transformation of the conditions under which speech becomes knowledge, a question that is not only linguistic, but profoundly political. It compels us to ask, who gets to produce knowledge for the world, whose interpretations travel, and whose meanings endure? When we shift from everyday interaction to the global stage, we see that recognition and misrecognition are not incidental, but institutionalized within the structures of knowledge production. And it is here that the question of voice becomes inseparable from the question of the global order. Madam Chair, if the challenge before us is to transform the conditions under which voice becomes recognized as knowledge, then we must turn to a deeper question. What counts as knowledge in the first place, and who gets to decide this? It is here that the issue of voice expands into the terrain of epistemology. Professor Anna Dumat from University of Cape Town, in the introduction to From Southern Theory to Decolonizing Sociolinguistics, Voices, Questions, and Alternatives, a volume to which I contributed, recounts memories of her grandmother and the knowledge she acquired in the forest. She reflects, and I quote, It was a world so different from my middle-class urban childhood, and the knowledges she taught me in the forest were unlike those that I learned at school. Today, I remember them and feel a certain sadness that I spent so much time with books studying and not more time with my grandmother in the forest, listening to her, learning from her, and celebrating her knowledges. This reflection, and crucially, the use of the plural form knowledges, reminds us that knowledge is not singular. It is plural. The task before us, therefore, is not to replace one system of knowledge with another, but to recognize, legitimize, and engage the plurality of knowledges that shape our world. At the same time, this plurality exists within a global system that does not recognize all knowledges equally. While Africa is widely acknowledged as a rich site of intellectual production and alternative ways of knowing, the challenge lies in how these knowledges are produced, validated, and circulated within global academic structures that continue to privilege certain epistemologies over others. The issue, therefore, is not the absence of knowledge, but the conditions under which it is recognized as legitimate and authoritative, and whether African scholarship can assert originality and agency within these constraints. And yet, it is important to remember that this was not always a question of possibility, but of practice. The tradition was real, and its vitality is powerfully illustrated by Professor Simfrey Makoni from Penn State University in the same volume that I referred to earlier. Reflecting on his academic journey, he recounts his stories of continuous shifts. And he says, and I quote, "From Cottonton University, I proceeded to the University of Ghana, Legon, Accra, where I completed my junior degree in English with a specialty in linguistics. What I found fascinating at the university was that most of the lecturers were Ghanaians, and the material that they used were written by African scholars. My experience in Ghana left me with the impression that a strong nationalist and Pan-African orientation to scholarship was indeed possible. It then took me some time to explore how this nationalist epistemological orientation can be integrated into linguistics, which we were taught is scientific and descriptive," unquote. Makoni completed his studies at the University of Ghana in 1984. The question for us then is unavoidable. How much of that intellectual confidence and epistemic self-determination has been sustained? Have we, over time, deepened that tradition? Or have we, in subtle and not so subtle ways, ceded ground? Madam Chair, multilingualism is often simplistically treated as a demographic feature, something that characterizes certain regions, particularly Africa. Yet the scale alone is striking. Recent estimates from APPIAH et al. 2026 suggest that Africa is home to approximately 2,167 living languages, second only to Asia. These languages are spoken across a population exceeding 1.2 billion people. While some are endangered, over 1,500 continue to show strong and developing vitality. In Ghana alone, we have about 73 living languages, the majority of which are indigenous. But multilingualism is far more than a numerical fact. It is a profound intellectual resource, one that offers critical insight into the social organization of communities, the negotiation of identity, and the construction of knowledge. In many African contexts, multilingualism is not exceptional. It is the fabric of everyday life. Speakers routinely move across languages, not randomly, but strategically, indexing social relationships, cultural affiliation, authority, and context. This fluidity allows us to see more clearly how meaning is negotiated and how knowledge is constructed in real-world interaction. In this sense, multilingualism is not simply about the presence of multiple languages. It's about how those languages are perceived, organized, and deployed within social life. Let me illustrate this through work that I have contributed to in two important volumes: Southernizing Social Linguistics, Colonialism, Racism, and the Patriarchy in Language in the Global South, and From Southern Theory to Decolonizing Social Linguistics, Voices, Questions, and Alternatives. A key insight emerging from this body of work is that our understanding of multilingualism has long been shaped by a monolingual bias. As Patanayak famously observed, and I quote, "The dominant monolingual orientation is cultivated in the developed world, and consequently 2 languages are considered a nuisance, 3 languages uneconomic, and many languages absurd. In multilingual countries, many languages are facts of life. Any restriction on the choice of language is a nuisance. One language is not only uneconomic, it is absurd," unquote. Despite growing global recognition that our world is multilingual, what Pierre Bourdieu later conceptualized as the monolingual habitus persists, the deep-seated assumption that monolingualism is the norm. In such contexts, one dominant language is treated as unmarked, legitimate, and sufficient for all domains of social life. By contrast, multilingual societies, particularly in the Global South, are characterized by fluidity, overlapping linguistic repertoires, and porous boundaries between languages. Here, movement across languages is not marked as deviation. It is simply how communication works. This has important implications. Educational systems that privilege a single dominant language often ignore the multilingual repertoires children bring to the classroom, the ability to navigate multiple linguistic systems, and the rich oral traditions that underpin knowledge transition. Multilingual education, therefore, holds significant promise. Yet across much of the Global South, policy debates remain disproportionately focused on English and other colonial languages. This tension is evident in a recent study on engaging with agency and structure in organizational and institutional language policy and planning, to be published by John Benjamin's publishing company. In that volume, my collaborators and I examined language practices in ECOWAS and SADC in a paper titled Agency Structure and Language Policy and Planning Ideologies in Regional Organizations in Africa, the case of ECOWAS and SADC. Our findings, unsurprisingly, reveal the overwhelming dominance of English in both organizations, despite ECOWAS's formal recognition of national languages and the significant presence of Francophone states. In SADC, where linguistic diversity is even more pronounced, English dominance is, if anything, even stronger. What this suggests is that monolingual ideologies continue to shape institutional practice, even in inherently multilingual contexts. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to the limitations of Eurocentric sociolinguistic theories. In a paper co-authored with Dr. Dorothy Ejapong, Making the Secular Sacred, Sociolinguistic Domains and Performance in Christian Worship, we interrogate the applicability of domain theory in multilingual African context. Situated within the sociology of language and religion framework, our study examines how language operates within contemporary Ghanaian Christian worship. Domain theory assumes that social life is organized into distinct domains such as religion, education, or the home, each associated with relatively stable language practices. Our findings challenge this assumption. Drawing on Bonaventura de Souza Santos' notion of epistemologies of the South, we argue that no single theoretical framework can capture the complexity of multilingual realities, and that multiple knowledge systems must be recognized. What we observe in Ghanaian church context is not a neatly bounded religious domain, but a multifunctional communicative space. Within a single setting, we find health education, dissemination of community and national news, announcements on employment and social programs, and the performance of cultural practices such as child naming ceremonies. These activities are accompanied by fluid language use, English, Akan, Ga, and other Ghanaian languages coexisting within the same interactional space. As we argue, AMFO and Omoni 2019, and I quote, the existence of multiple languages combined with the desire to make religion culturally and linguistically accessible and acceptable drives the desire to use multiple languages within a single religious domain. The religious domain can only be a reflection of the larger community, unquote. The implication is clear. The idea of fixed single language domains is an oversimplification and often a misrepresentation of multilingual realities. Indeed, we propose a more flexible approach that recognizes multi-domain functionality and linguistic fluidity. Importantly, this is not uniquely African. Similar patterns are observed in African American and Latino congregations in the global north. What this suggests is not African exceptionalism, but a broader theoretical limitation. Multilingual African contexts do not merely illustrate theory, they challenge and expand it. This critique of theory leads us to a closely related question, not only how knowledge is conceptualized, but who is recognized as a producer of that knowledge. In other words, who really gets published in sociolinguistics. This concern has been described as academic apartheid, systemic inequalities in funding, representation, and standards that produce not only underrepresentation, but epistemic invisibility. Empirical evidence supports this. For example, Busi Makoni 2023 shows that African authors remain significantly underrepresented in leading linguistics journals despite substantial scholarly output. Madam Chair, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, notably, this exclusion becomes even more pronounced when we consider gender. Drawing on Busi Makoni's work on the erasure of Black African women's scholarship and related studies, we see that African women scholars occupy a particularly marginal position within the global knowledge system. As Grace Connor 2019 poignantly notes, and I quote, "I was raised a girl in a sexist world, and I became Black in a racist world. Thus, the two issues, my race and my gender, are intertwined in my life experience and always have been. This is because structural inequality for Black women is multiple, and it morphs into intangibles constantly," unquote. This intersection of race and gender produces what has been described as conditions of invisibility, exclusion, and silencing. Research shows that Black women scholars publish less and are cited less frequently than their male and white counterparts. Identical work may be received differently depending on the identity of the author, and access to advancement is shaped by structural barriers embedded within academic institutions. While much of the available research focuses on African American women, African-based scholars face additional constraints, including limited resources, weaker networks, and reduced visibility in global publishing circuits. Even where African scholars are present, inclusion is often symbolic rather than structural. My own experience reflects this. When I was elected to the consultation board of the International Pragmatics Association in 2013, I was the first and only African. Today, we are two. While this signals progress, it also underscores how slow that progress has been. These patterns, limited representation on editorial boards, restricted keynote visibility, and constrained participation in decision-making spaces point to a broader issue, the uneven distribution of epistemic authority. Madam Chair, it is within this context that my collaborators and I undertook a study on African contributions to 4 leading sociolinguistic journals. Inspired by Bonnie Kahela and Bonnie McElhinney, our findings were clear. African scholars remain significantly underrepresented. We looked at 4 journals. For the first journal, the International Journal of the Sociology of Language, the African author representation was 3.9%. The 3 other journals, Journal of Social Linguistics, International Journal of Bilingualism, and Journal of Language Variation and Change, the African author representation was approximately 0.7% each. Even within these limited numbers, gender disparities are pronounced, with women significantly underrepresented in both single and collaborative authorships. Taken together, these findings lead to a critical conclusion. The issue is not the absence of African scholarship, it is the limited recognition of its authority. And when we layer gender onto this, we see even more clearly how certain voices are systematically muted while others are amplified. But these exclusions are not only institutional, they are also deeply linguistic and cultural, embedded in the very way societies construct gender, authority, and legitimacy. Madam Chair, in my work on the representation of women in Akan proverbs, my collaborator, Professor Grace Yaba, and I demonstrate that language does not merely reflect gender relations, it actively reproduces and regulates them. Through a feminist critical discourse analysis, we show that proverbs function not only as repositories of communal wisdom, but as mechanisms for enforcing social norms. They encode expectations, they normalize roles, and crucially, they discipline deviation. Across the data, women were constructed as carers and nurturers, submissive and differential, and bounded within socially prescribed rules. Even positive portrayals often serve to sustain hegemonic femininity by rewarding compliance and discouraging resistance. This regulatory function becomes particularly explicit in what we identify as a discourse of women as usurpers. Here, the issue is not simply who women are, but what happens when they attempt to cross boundaries. This is vividly captured in one of the proverbs we cite, an Mfantse proverb which says, "Besia shanchi benyin shancha nensahufo," translated as, if a woman urinates like a man does, her hands get wet. I leave you to picture this imagery, which is deliberate and cautionary. The message is clear. To step into male-coded spaces is to invite failure, embarrassment, or even sanction. 2 accompanying proverbs, one in infancy and the other one in Ekwapem, reinforce this logic. The fancy one says, "Besiagur imbenyin gora, watcher imbenyin chir." If a woman plays like a man, she gets defeated as a man. And the Ekwapem one says, "Obiatenten suaba owandi." That's when a tall woman carries palm nuts, the Turkan eats them. In other words, a woman who rises beyond expected limits invites loss rather than reward. Together, these proverbs do more than describe gender roles. They police the boundaries of possibility. They construct a world in which ambition is reframed as transgression, equality as risk, and aspiration as something to be disciplined. And importantly, these patterns are not relics of a distant past. Sorry, the sweat is getting into my eye. And importantly, these patterns are not relics of a distant past. They persist, sometimes overtly, sometimes in more subtle forms in contemporary discourse. In the Ghanaian public and media space, we hear commentary that questions the legitimacy of accomplished women or reduces them in ways that would not be applied to their male counterparts. We see this in how women in public life are evaluated. Women are not assessed on competence alone, if even that becomes a consideration. but on tone, appearance, and perceived propriety. A confident woman may be described, as we say in Ghana, too known. A firm woman as difficult. An assertive woman as disrespectful. In the Ghanaian public sphere, this is not too difficult to observe. Recently, a female CEO of a state corporation appeared before Parliament. Public conversation, particularly on social media, did not center on the substance of her appearance or the issues under discussion. Instead, it focused overwhelmingly on her body and appearance. Some commentary framed her in moral terms, questioning whether she upheld the standards expected of a public figure, while other reactions reduced the moment to a spectacle, praising her in ways that had little to do with her professional role. Madam Chair, permit me to refer to one post on X, what some of you still call Twitter, which attracted considerable commentary. It said, "She's 50, acting CEO of so I've blocked that out. Someone who should uphold the highest moral standards and serve as a mentor and role model for Ghanaian girls. Yet she appeared before Parliament with noticeable cleavage on full display. The reaction, grown men and others shamelessly hyping it up, showering her with queen and slay mama praise, as if it were some kind of victory." Madam Chair, I'm not sure which is more troubling, the slay mama praise or the moral condemnation. But the point here is not the specific reactions, it is the pattern. A woman's authority is reframed through her appearance, and her institutional voice is displayed by commentary on her body. This is a contemporary echo of the same discursive logic we observed in the Proverbs. When women step into places of authority, the terms of evaluation shift. What we are witnessing, therefore, is not merely bias. It is the continuation of a discursive tradition. The same logic that once warned women not to urinate like men now operates in more subtle forms, questioning their ambition, moderating their voice, and delimiting their authority. This is not incidental. It is linguistic. And because it is linguistic, it shapes one of the most fundamental questions at the heart of this lecture. Whose voice is recognized as authoritative and whose voice is rendered excessive, illegitimate, or out of place? To silence a voice, you do not always have to suppress it. Sometimes you only need to define the conditions under which it becomes unacceptable. And so, when we speak of voice, we must recognize that it is not only granted or denied in institutions, it is constructed, constrained, and contested in language itself. Indeed, as President John Dramani Mahama recently observed at the United Nations, and I quote, "Erasure begins with language, when words are used to create mythology until it becomes a full verbal reduction," unquote. Madam Chair, if reclaiming voice is structural, as I have argued, then it cannot be achieved through individual scholarship alone. It requires institutions, it requires networks, and crucially, it requires shared frameworks that redefine how knowledge is produced, validated, and circulated. Because voice, in the sense that I'm using it today, is not only about expression, it's about capacity, access, legitimacy, and authority. It is within this context that the Africa Charter for Transformative Research Collaborations becomes particularly significant, co-created by Africa's major higher education and research constituencies, including the Association of African Universities, the African Research Universities Alliance, ARUA, the African Academy of Sciences, AAS, and CODESRA, and co-facilitated by the University of Bristol's Perivoli Africa Research Center, the University of South Africa, and the University of Cape Town. The Charter represents a deliberate African-centered effort to reposition the continent within the global knowledge system. At its core, the Charter recognizes something that we have been tracing throughout this lecture, that the global production of knowledge is shaped by deep, multi-layered power imbalances, which may be epistemic, linguistic, institutional, material, and gendered. The Charter therefore calls for a fundamental rebalancing of the global research ecosystem, one grounded in equity, co-creation, and African intellectual leadership. Importantly, the University of Ghana was among the institutions that endorsed this charter at its launch in Windhoek in July 2023. That endorsement is significant because it signals that reclaiming voice is not only a theoretical concern, it is an institutional responsibility. It is within this broader continental framework that my work with the African Humanities Association is situated. This is where my engagement with scholarly networks becomes central to my work. My involvement with the AHA reflects a long-standing commitment to building collective intellectual platforms that foreground African priorities, epistemologies, and scholarly agency. The AHA itself represents an important historical transition from externally driven capacity-building initiatives to a fully African-led scholarly community committed to advancing humanities research across the continent. And within the AHA, the Enhancing Humanities Research in Africa, EHURA project, becomes a concrete expression of these charter principles in practice. EHURA is a $900,000 initiative supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, designed as a comprehensive response to the very challenges I have outlined in this lecture: uneven research capacity, limited access to publishing platforms, weak mentorship pipelines, and the persistent underrepresentation of African scholars, particularly women. But what is important about EHURA is not its scale per se, it is its design. EHURA recognizes that reclaiming voice requires systemic intervention across the research ecosystem. EHURA operationalizes the Charter's vision by centering African scholars in research leadership, strengthening institutional capacity, expanding publication platforms, and advancing gender equity, while ensuring that African scholarship actively shapes rather than trails emerging knowledge systems such as AI. What we see here, therefore, is a necessary alignment. The Africa Charter provides the principles, scholarly networks like AHA provides the platforms, and initiatives like EHURA provide the mechanisms. Together, they represent a shift from critique to construction, from identifying exclusion to building systems of inclusion. Because ultimately, reclaiming voice is not only about being heard, it is about reshaping the conditions under which knowledge itself is produced. What this represents is a deliberate attempt to move beyond critique to infrastructure building. EHURA translates my work into practice by building inclusive systems through which African scholarship, especially by women, is produced, recognized, and authoritative, showing that voice is not claimed but built. This work of building voice also extends to the infrastructures through which knowledge is disseminated and recognized. At the institutional level, we are also taking deliberate steps to strengthen the visibility and authority of African scholarship through our support for University of Ghana-hosted journals. Recognizing that publication and citation ecosystems are central to whose knowledge travels, we have invested in improving the quality, consistency, and international standing of our journals. Through targeted editorial training, policy development, and strategic support, we are positioning these journals to meet global standards and to be indexed in credible databases. Currently, we have 7 of our journals indexed in Agile Africa Journals Online. We have 2 in Scopus, we have 1 in Web of Science, and you can find 6 in EBSCO. Already, several of these journals are gaining wider global readership and visibility, with growing international engagement and downloads. This is not simply about institutional visibility. It is about ensuring that African scholarship is not peripheral, but central, that it is not only produced, but seen, cited and recognized as authoritative. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, let me turn finally to a dimension of this conversation that is often acknowledged but not always confronted directly, which is the question of funding. If voice is about authority in knowledge production, then funding is one of the most powerful mechanisms through which that authority is structured. Funding shapes what questions are asked, which methods are prioritized, who owns data, who controls intellectual property, and ultimately, whose knowledge counts. In this sense, funding is not neutral. It is deeply implicated in the political economy of knowledge production. Across much of sub-Saharan Africa, perhaps with the partial exception of South Africa, research funding remains overwhelmingly dependent on external sources, particularly from the global north. This dependence has consequences. Even where collaborations are well-intentioned, funding architectures often come with predefined research priorities, asymmetries in agenda setting, and imbalances in ownership and recognition. The result is a system in which African scholars may participate actively in research, yet remain peripheral in defining its direction and outcomes. In Ghana, the situation is equally instructive. Each faculty member in our public universities is, in principle, entitled to an annual research allowance of the cedi equivalent of $1,500. In practice, however, this allowance functions less as a meaningful investment in research and more as a form of income supplementation. Together with its accompanying book allowance, it is commonly referred to as BRA, and as many of us know, not always affectionately. I'm sure my UTAC colleagues are here. The process of accessing it is often accompanied by considerable agitation, sometimes even threats of strike, and occasionally actual strikes. Even the question of the exchange rate to be applied, whether JDM1 or Nanadu rate, can itself generate no small measure of disquiet. While all of this is unfolding publicly, friends and family wait in eager anticipation to partake in what is presumed to be a small windfall. By the time the allowance is eventually disbursed, the research momentum it was intended to support has often dissipated. If indeed it was ever sufficient to meaningfully sustain research in the first place. And so, in a moment of characteristic Ghanaian ingenuity, BRA is sometimes reinterpreted not as book and research allowance, but as a building and roofing allowance. This may sound humorous, but the underlying reality is serious. It is within this context that the passage of the Ghana National Research Fund, Act 1056, in 2020 was welcome news. Equally encouraging has been the recent effort to operationalize the Act through the establishment of its board and secretariat with the promise of a seed grant. So I'm reminding the Honorable Minister. We wait with cautious optimism to see how its full implementation will reshape the research landscape in Ghana, particularly in terms of providing sustained, predictable, and locally controlled funding for research. Let me bring this closer to home. At the University of Ghana, the data are telling of a total research funding portfolio of approximately $38.6 million in 2024 and $59.9 million in 2025, only 2.4% and 0.9% respectively originated from within Ghana. And even these figures require qualification. A significant portion of what appears as internal funding through institutions such as the Ghana Health Service and the Ghana Statistical Service is itself derived from external sources. In effect, the system remains overwhelmingly externally financed. This brings us back to the central argument of this lecture. If voice is the authority to define problems, set agendas, and shape knowledge, then funding is one of the primary instruments through which that authority is exercised. And where funding is externally controlled, voice is inevitably constrained. This is why institutional responses matter. At the University of Ghana, we have for several years maintained a research fund supported through internally generated resources. More recently, we have established a dedicated graduate research fund aimed at supporting our research graduate students for their research work. To ensure sustainability of these and others, we have recently approved the establishment of a UG Research and Innovation Fund with seed money from the existing Research Endowment Fund to take effect from January 2027. These are modest but important steps towards building internal capacity and autonomy. But much more is required. Reclaiming voice in the global order demands national investment in research, continental funding mechanisms, and greater participation from both the public and private sectors. Governments must recognize research not as a luxury, but as a strategic necessity. Private industry must see research funding not as philanthropy, but as investment in innovation, development, and national competitiveness. Because ultimately, without control over the resources that shape knowledge, the quest to reclaim voice will remain incomplete. Madam Chair, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me now draw these reflections together as I bring my lecture to a close. This lecture has been in many ways a journey across my own scholarly path, across the terrains of language and power, and across the broader question of Africa's place in the global knowledge order. At its core, my argument has been simple but consequential, that voice matters, and that voice is not merely about speaking, but about being recognized as a producer of knowledge, a shaper of narratives, and an author of meaning. Through my work in pragmatics and social linguistics, I have sought to demonstrate that language is not neutral. It is a site of action, a site of negotiation, and critically, a site of power. Whether in multilingual practices, in religious discourse, in political communication, or in gendered proverbs, we see that language does not simply describe the world, it actively structures it. We have seen how global knowledge systems have historically privileged certain voices while marginalizing others. How multilingual African realities challenge dominant theoretical assumptions. How gendered discourses regulate authority and delimit who is heard. And how even in contemporary context, voice can be displaced, reframed, or diminished through language itself. We have also seen that these patterns are not accidental. They are structural, they are historical, and they are reproducible. But, and this is important, they are also transformable. And this is where my work extends beyond scholarship alone. Through my engagement in professional associations and networks, and I cited the African Humanities Association, I've been part of efforts to build platforms that enable African scholarship not only to exist, but to thrive and lead. Through initiatives such as EKURA, we are working to strengthen research ecosystems, support early career scholars, and deliberately center African and especially African women's voices in knowledge production. Through frameworks such as the Africa Charter for Transformative Research Collaborations, we are collectively reimagining what equitable, ethical, and Africa-centered knowledge systems can look like. And through my role in university leadership, I have come to appreciate even more deeply that institutions matter, because it is institutions that create the conditions for scholarship, allocate resources, shape priorities, and determine whether voice is merely expressed or truly empowered. Remember the saying that is often heard in our parliamentary politics, that the minority can have their say and the majority will have their way. At the University of Ghana, our efforts, whether through research funding, graduate support, journal growth, or partnerships, are all in different ways part of this broader project to reposition African scholarship as authoritative, visible, and impactful. But let me be clear, this work cannot be done in isolation, not by individuals, not by single institutions, not even by nations acting alone. As the Akan proverb says, "Diakrojin frama ibu." A single tree cannot withstand the wind. Reclaiming voice is a collective endeavor. It requires scholars who question, institutions that support, networks that connect, and societies that recognize the value of knowledge. It requires that we move from participation to leadership, from inclusion to authority, and from being subjects of knowledge to becoming its authors. And perhaps, most importantly, it requires that we remain attentive to the power of language itself. Because, as we have seen throughout this lecture, voice can be enabled, but it can also be diminished. It can be amplified, but it can also be erased. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, and so, if there is one thought that I would like to leave with us tonight, it is this: we do not reclaim voice only by speaking louder. We reclaim it by shaping the systems that determine who is heard. Until the story is told in our own voice, with our own words, and on our own terms, we may be heard, but we will not yet have spoken. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention. Thank you. Please, you may be seated. And I have the permission of Madam Chair to end with a few acknowledgements, and I promise to be economical with my words. To all of you here in person, and to those joining us online from across the world, thank you for showing up. In a time when everything can be recorded and watched later, your presence here today, here and now, in person and online, means a great deal to me. I'm deeply grateful to the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences for welcoming me into its fold, and to those who nominated and supported me through to my induction. I really appreciate you. I owe a profound debt to my academic mentors, my teachers and lecturers, and particularly my MPhil and PhD supervisor, Emeritus Professor Torstein Frithing of the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and my PhD co-supervisor, Professor Kwakyi Osam. These people shaped my intellectual journey. I wish to make special mention of two pioneering Ghanaian women in my department. Professor Florence Abna-Dolphin, who made the profession very attractive with her grace and wit. And Professor Akosia Anyidoho. She gave me the opportunity to join the department as a young lecturer, a moment that altered the trajectory of my career. To my collaborators, many of whom began as my students, thank you. I've learned as much from you, if not more, than you have from me. To my department, thank you for being such a collegial and nurturing space. I often say that it is one of the most congenial departments on UG campus, and I do so even more confidently now from where I sit. To the many professional and academic networks that I've been privileged to serve in one capacity or other, each of them have been a space of learning, growth, and intellectual community, and I am grateful for such opportunities. Balancing university leadership with scholarship is no small task, and I'm therefore deeply appreciative of the Chancellor, Mrs. Mary Chinrihesi, the University Council, past and present chairs, Justice Sofa Akufu, retired, and Miss Marietta Ejewabru, who is here today. I need to acknowledge her. After this evening, I need to go back to my job. And to the members of council as well for your unflinching support. My colleagues in management deserve special mention for their collegiality, reliability, and steady partnership. To my office and domestic team, as well as my household manager, thank you for your commitment, dependability, and quiet efficiency. You make complexity look manageable. To my academic sisters and daughters, and I suspect now a few granddaughters are emerging, thank you for the continuity of community. You see, no matter how hard we try, we always have one brother or son squeezing in. We are grateful for the diversity and collaboration nonetheless. To my girlfriends, especially my HOPSA 88-year group, thank you for the laughter, the grounding, and the reminder that life must also be lived, not only analyzed. This is our before and after picture, after 40 years picture. To my pastors and the Praise Community Church Adenta, thank you for the spiritual nourishment, steady guidance, and prayer support. Let me also acknowledge the planning committee that worked closely with the GAAS Secretariat to deliver this event, chaired by Professor Justice Bawale and comprising Professor Clement Appa, Professor Gordon Nkrumah, Professor Jemima Anderson, Dr. Dorothy Ejapong, Mrs. Isabella Biti, and Mrs. Pascaline Samsori, and others who were co-opted. Selassie and team, you did your magic. You did an excellent job. Handling everything else while I focused on the content of this lecture. This was one opportunity they had to overrule my suggestions, and they didn't miss it. I'm equally grateful to the University of Ghana's Public Affairs Directorate, the Information Technology Directorate, and the Safety and Security Services Directorate for their effective collaboration with GAAS, and to the GAAS Secretariat itself, ES, Mr. Daniel Homeku and team, thank you. To all who generously supported and sponsored this event, I am most grateful. Finally, to my family, to my late parents for the foundation of love, discipline, and possibility. To my siblings, I'm grateful for your persistent encouragement. To my husband, Frank, for your enduring support. And to my children, Yofi, Mamiaraba, and Ifwa Benyua, for constantly reminding me why the journey must continue. Mesdames, Moi, Après, Oyuwaladon, Nagode, thank you all.
Audience, you must admit this has been awesome, simply awesome. And just one phrase, we do not reclaim voice by speaking louder. And that's my take-home message. And my elders at the back says, once an academy inaugural of this nature has been delivered, compelling, uncompromising, brilliantly delivered, there's no more to be said. So, congratulations again, and applause, a massive applause again. Thank you, wonderful. Thank you. And you can see the team behind this, that almost the whole of Ghana is shown here today, literally. And not only that, VC brings along the Ministry of Education, and everyone knows the academy is the most impoverished orphan on earth. And we had to fight to see him, and he promised a 5 million, and he's actually delivered. So the news is out. VC, you brought the crowd and you brought us money. What more can I say? Thank you so much. And to all of you, I think we've witnessed an amazing, amazing intellectual discourse. Thank you.
Thank you. We are almost out of here, but let's kindly give the chair, my boss, a round of applause. All right. So a couple of announcements, and the first is an upcoming event. We are pleased to announce that there will be an inaugural lecture here in this auditorium on 7th May 2026 on the topic, The Three Phases of Connectivity, Ghana's Scientific Journey to the Internet, to be delivered by a distinguished fellow, Dr. Kwame. Take this opportunity to invite all of us to be present on 7th May. We would like to extemporaneously, and at the risk that we may not be able to mention the names of all dignitaries present, apologies in advance. We have in our midst our Honorable Haruna Idrisu, the Minister for Education, who has been acknowledged. And also we have the Chairperson of the Council of the University of Ghana, Madam EMERITA Ejewa-Brew, who also has been acknowledged. We have the Director General of the Ghana Tertiary Education Commission, Professor Ahmed Ejinapo Abdullahi. And then, as this is we also have the Director General for UNESCO Ghana here. I think he has exited. So this is a University of Ghana event. So we do have in our midst a number of former Vice-Chancellors of the university. We have Emeritus Professor Ivan Adai-Mensah here. We have Emeritus Professor Clifford Niboitego and Emeritus Professor Ernest Aite, also seated right there. As mentioned in the salutations, we have past presidents of the Academy. We are fortunate to have Dr. S.K.B. Asante, who has been here. We have Emeritus Professor Sefadede, also Her Ladyship Justice of the Supreme Court, Henrietta Mensah Bonsu. All right. We would like to acknowledge this lecture has been sponsored by a number of entities, and it is fair and good that we acknowledge them. So from the University of Ghana and other external bodies, we have the Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research, University of Ghana Business School, Regional Institute for Population Studies, RIPS, Institute for Statistical, Social and Economic Research, ISEC, the Department of Economics, University of Ghana, University of Ghana Medical School, School of Public Health, University of Ghana, the West African Center for Cell Biology of Infectious Pathogens, and Accra City Campus, as well as the Eugene Credit Union and the Eugene Enterprise Limited. Academy and the speaker are profoundly grateful for your immense contribution to this program. We would also like to acknowledge, as we usually do, and we do this with a lot of happiness, that our very faithful supporters of academics programs, having senior high schools who attend academics programs, and in terms of mentorship, generational inspiration, we always gladly welcome SHSs from across Ghana who attend academics programs. For today, we have Laboni Senior SHS And as my people will say, Presbyterian Boys Senior High School, Crescent Legon. Accra Girls Senior High School. And we also do have students from the Linguistic Department, University of Ghana, Political Science Department, University of Ghana, and the English Department, University of Ghana. We gratefully acknowledge your presence and your support. Madam Chair, I left out a few of the sponsors, but maybe they are also part of those who will be making presentations, so I'll take the opportunity to mention them now. So this is one inaugural lecture that we have many presentations, and in the interest of organization time, etc., it has been agreed that we will not be able to present all of them. So a gift table has been set apart, and our speaker is grateful for all those who wish to present her with gifts, and you're kindly welcome to present them there. However, as we heard, Uncle Frank and the family are here, so we will make there will be presentations by the family of the speaker. There will also be a presentation by University of Ghana and a presentation from NTNU, Norwegian University of Science and Technology, in that order. So you are welcome to make the presentations. Family of Professor Nana Bam for making the presentation. Thank you. Thank you. The University of Ghana may proceed with the presentation, please. Thank you, University of Ghana. And then a presentation by Norwegian alumni, NTNU, Trondheim, Norway. We are also happy to announce that there will be presentations by Promasido Ghana, Office of the Vice-Chancellor, African Humanities Association, the Linguistic Association of Ghana, the Linguistic Department, University of Ghana, the Center for Gender Studies and Advocacy, SEGENSA, College of Health Sciences, University of Ghana, the Research, Innovation and Development Directorate, erstwhile ORID, University of Ghana, the College of Education, University of Ghana, and also the UNFPA Eugene Digital Youth Village, fellows and master students, as well as Garnet. So thank you. Thank you. So last or penultimate announcement, I'm pleased to announce that there will be refreshments, light refreshment outside for all of us. We take the opportunity to also ask fellows and dignitaries and family members to proceed to the atrium near the fellows' lounge. Then there will be a continuation of the nice music we all had throughout till it dropped, as they said, in many years ago. And then, right. Our distinguished speaker, the Professor APPIAH AMFO, would like to invite and take photographs. She'll be greatly obliged to take photographs with all SHS students after the recession. So please, we would ask that you take note of this. So finally, we are at the end of the program, and we would respectfully ask that we all be upstanding as the speaker exits the podium. Thank you and have a good night.
The students, the speaker is waiting for you outside. Students, SHS students, the speaker is waiting for you outside to take pictures. Labone, Presec, and Accra girls. The speaker is waiting for you outside. Thank you.